Greetings, everyone. I am so honored to be here today to welcome my friend Rupa Marya to speak to us here at UC Berkeley. So sorry, my computer is deciding it wants to update. So let me just take care of it not doing that now. Okay. I'm so thrilled to be here. My name is Coco Auerswald. I'm a faculty member at the School of Public Health. I'm a pediatrician and adolescent medicine doc and fellow activist to end homelessness in our lifetime, along with Dr. Marya. I want to start by acknowledging that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone tribe. This land is and continues to be of incredible importance to the Ohlone people. And we recognize that every member of our Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this unceded land since the founding of Berkeley in 1868. So consistent with our values of community and diversity here at Berkeley, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. And by offering this land acknowledgement, I hope to, in part, acknowledge Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to holding the university more accountable to the needs of Indian and Indigenous peoples. I also encourage those of you who can to pay a land tax for your use of this land to live or to work. So the format of today's event is that Professor Marya will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. And so we'll ask you to use the Q&A feature. The chat is disabled. And I will ask those questions on your behalf. If you don't want me to use your name, you can indicate that. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Rupa. She has so many identities in my heart and in my life. She is an associate professor of medicine at UC San Francisco. That's the official thing I'm supposed to say. She's a physician who is committed to caring to the most vulnerable and sickest of patients out there. She is a sister in the fight against homelessness. I always know that I can contact her if I need an ally in this work. She's an activist and the founder and director of the Do No Harm Coalition, which includes 450 healthcare providers fighting against social inequity and racism in medicine. I'm proud to be a member of that coalition. She is a mentor and teacher, not only to students, but to her colleagues, including myself. She is a public servant and is serving the state of California through the Health California for All Coalition, helping to fight around single-payer healthcare. And today she's going to talk about her first book, which was co-authored by Raj Patel and released earlier this year. I was so excited when I was at the UC Santa Cruz bookstore, and there it was on the table. And I was just like, oh, girl, you rock. And the reason why this book is so important, there's so many reasons why it's important, but I'm going to share why I think it's important. And that is that when I was in med school, and then when Rupa was in med school, Rupa's a little younger than me because she'll always be younger at heart. It dispels what we were taught in med school. And what we were taught in med school was that people who are historically marginalized or people who are poor had different health because they behaved differently. And so we found a way to blame the poor health of historically marginalized populations on them through poor decisions. And so we wanted to study their knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs to change those beliefs and change their behavior so then they could be healthier, because in fact it was their fault that their health was poor. And since then, there's been a lot of important work, including by scholars here at Berkeley, that I'm incredibly proud to be affiliated with, showing that poverty has a direct effect on people's health and has a direct effect on the health of historically marginalized populations, regardless of their behavior. And in fact, often despite healthy behaviors. And this work is still kind of hidden behind the ivory tower or in the ivory tower. And so this book is so important to help make that work more visible so we can stop blaming people and start fighting the structures that are making them unhealthy. So that was a little long, but I really think this is an incredibly important book, and I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. So welcome, Rupa.
Thank you, Coco. Thank you, ISSI and the School of Public Health and social medicine folks for inviting me here. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I share the right thing. Let's see. Can we all see? Decolonizing medicine. Okay, great.
Yes.
So today we are going to talk about how to more effectively address the healthcare outcomes that we are seeing and how to stop, engaging in medical gaslighting, what Coco was just talking about, blaming the victims of these social structures that are making people sick. I also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the territory of Huichin in unceded and occupied Chochenyo-Ohlone territory. I was born and raised in Ramatush territory in what is now called Mountain View. My grandfather died there. My sons were born there, and I work as a physician there. I am grateful to be working with Ramatush Ohlone community on helping them get land back in their territory and working to repair the wounds that colonialism has exacted on people. So I'm going to talk today about this book. It was very challenging to write this book. I was honored to write it with Raj Patel. We came up with the ideas in this book before COVID. About 3 years before COVID, we said, let's write a book about these things, looking at how the health of our bodies, the health of the societies we're in, and the health of the planet are all interconnected, and they're all experiencing this inflammation. And I just want to share that it is because of my ancestry as a Punjabi woman born and raised in these territories, because of all the colonial terror in my homelands. It is because I have worked as a musician and don't section my identity, and never have, between being a doctor or a scholar or an artist or a mother or a movement worker, that I don't engage in hierarchies around those identities or relegate one to being a hobby, because the work of my music is what brought me into the spaces to understand what I'm going to share with you very briefly here today. So COVID exposed to us everything that we had already intuited. So Raj Patel and I were looking at, over the last, I would say 20 years of my work in medicine, just starting to notice how groups that were impacted by colonialism more intensely had a more profound expression of inflammatory disease. At that time, we didn't know they were all diseases based in inflammation, but now we do. And at that time, about 15 years ago, as I was touring with my band, and then I'd be traveling to autonomous regions that where Indigenous people were struggling for their sovereignty, or in places like Ireland or India, where colonial structures were still very much intact, I started to notice these patterns of how people were suffering from these diseases, and started to make these connections with what I was seeing at the bedside with my patients. And COVID really just put a big exclamation point on our thesis as we were writing this book. So as we see here, those who've been most impacted by COVID are, Black and Indigenous people, those people who here in the United States have been most harmed by the structures of colonialism. And when I started looking at how, colonialism was created and recreated today, that the structures that we're dealing with today are reified in all of our social engagements and interactions, I started to see how, capitalism required systems of supremacism, required a division and conquering of of people, a separation of people from nature, a separation of man from woman, these false architectures that allowed for the system to keep going. And through that ongoing engine of the system, what it results in, aside from profit for increasingly fewer number of people and power for those people, is widespread trauma and inflammation for the rest of us. And so that really formed, the starting to look at this stuff more carefully. So in the last 10 years, we've learned that all the diseases I take care of as a hospital medicine doctor at UCSF, almost every single one of them has in its origin, in its pathogenesis, inflammation. From cardiovascular disease to Alzheimer's disease to cancer, to depression, anxiety, and suicidality, to now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is the leading cause of end-stage liver disease in the United States, surpassing even alcoholic cirrhosis, to severe COVID. These are all diseases of inflammation. And so what is inflammation? Inflammation is actually the body's ancient, it's evolutionarily conserved response of the innate immune system to damage or the threat of damage. And it is the way in which the body is trying to restore its optimum working state or homeostasis. And that when, in the example of an acute inflammatory event with a paper cut, you have inflammation is set off by the damage. This wound healing response is activated. And then once the wound is healed, the response turns off and inflammation goes away. But what we're seeing in these diseases is that inflammation keeps running and you get this chronic systemic inflammatory state. What was fascinating to me in researching this book with Raj Patel, and I don't think this book could have been written by either one of us. So Raj is a professor of policy. He is just an incredible encyclopedic mind, looking at food systems and economies and ecologies, and bringing together an understanding of how we think about the immune system, how we think about the body in medicine. Has literally been circumscribed by our understanding of history and power. So, back in the 50s, as we were studying immunology, there was this sense that, there's something self and something foreign. So the self and other mentality, which is really a vestige of how colonial conquest happened. And so your body has these police that are going around and patrolling the border of the self and eliminate anything that's foreign. And what we know now is that that is way too simplistic of a model, and that what we understand is happening with the immune system is this danger model. So that there are alarm signals that are being sent by distress cells that activate the immune system in a very important way. And so how this distress is registered in the body is critical to understand if we want to understand what's sending people into these dysregulated immune states. So this whole self and other concept is a part of this array of errors that were propagated during the Enlightenment. Descartes is one of our favorite punching bags, with this concept of the mind being separate from the body, or nature being separate from civilization, or Christian separate from heathen, man separate from woman. So the world was organized in these dichotomies that was actually playing a critical role in how colonization happened. So these thoughts were advanced in a time where it became necessary to justify the land theft, the labor theft of other people's places and things. And so if we could justify that, those Native American people didn't really know what to do with the land. They were just here living for thousands of years in ecological balance. Clearly, they didn't know how to exploit a forest. And so they weren't using the land. They were savage or uncivilized. And that allowed for the justification of levels of horror that we see here in California with the genocide of our indigenous communities. But it's important to understand that the history of colonialism is also the history of medicine, because with the militaries and the missionaries came the medics. And the medics were not there to, make the indigenous people healthy. The medics were there to keep the colonizers healthy enough to extract the resources and dominate the people that were there. And once we understand that, it becomes, a good place to start looking at, the legacies of medical racism that we see today. And the health outcomes that we see today should not be a shock to us, because the systems that we're working in are a part of this system of domination and violence. What we do in our book is advance an understanding of where the pathology is. And in Western medicine, so going back to the history, the first mention of inflammation and fever was back in the 6th century BCE. And then Celsus, a Roman physician, came along and codified the hallmarks of inflammation through, rubor, redness, heat, pain, and swelling, which are the cardinal signs of inflammation. In the 2nd century ACE, there was Galen's humoral theory, which basically said with these humors that were out of whack, you get the expression of disease, or when they're in balance, you get the expression of wellness. And that was sort of the prevailing thought around medicine and wellness until about the 1800s. So in the 1700s, you had this very strange, almost metaphorical classification of fevers that really said more about how a patient looked rather than having any explanatory power about what's going on in the body. And it was in the 1800s when a French scientist, Broussais, advanced medical physiology by actually physically locating on a physical temporal basis what was going on in an organ, so that inflammation in a particular site of the body, which is characterized by the ending itis, so a pneumonitis or a meningitis, that inflammation and irritation in a particular place was the underlying cause of the disease that was being seen. What happened in the 1840s, as Virchow, who is one of our fathers of pathology in medicine, someone we all learn about in medical school, who was we learned about Virchow's node in diagnosing cancers. We learned about Virchow's triad and how blood flows through our vessels. But what we didn't learn in medical school, that Virchow was a radical revolutionary on the barricades, fighting for a world that he knew had to come. And Virchow, as a young 27-year-old, was given the task of understanding why there was a typhus outbreak in Upper Silesia, what is now Czechia in Poland. And so Virchow went to this place and saw what was going on with typhus and realized that, typhus was really spreading in places of desperate social condition. So he came back and said, it's not that there is an organism that's causing the problem. The problem is all the social conditions that are predisposing the body's reaction to that organism. And so his prescription was, eliminating German colonization of those places. So literally decolonizing and dismantling German imperialism. So in those places, the Polish and Czech people were not, allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to teach their languages in school. They were not allowed to practice their religions. They couldn't organize in worker co-ops. They were being subjected to the dominance of German imperialism. And so we take in our book Virchow's step further, because we think he was really onto something. And what we show in our book is that it is that the body is actually responding in a very normal way to pathology, a pathological world. And so that if the social structures and environmental and ecological structures around the body are damaging or invoke damage, what you'll see is inflammation. The sum of lifetime exposures around the body, which includes everything from your lifestyle choices, what you eat, to the air that you breathe, to the histories of your ancestors, to the cosmologies and your understanding of your place in the world, to the stories that you're told as a child about how safe the world is or not, is not safe, to the structures of power that you encounter, all of these things that start from the time technically that you're in utero, but actually extend through generations behind you and generations forward, that is called the exposome. And so if the exposome is toxic, what we see is that the body is responding to that damage through inflammation, through the inflammatory response. And we can see this in every replicating somatic cell, so not germline cells, replicating somatic cells in the body. So that when there is stress, when there is distress, and this can be from everything to smelling the ABNI foundry here in East Oakland, where I live, and the hexavalent chromium that spews into the air, to hearing about getting the talk, which is necessary for young Black boys in this country because of the lifetime risk of dying at the hands of police violence is 1 in 1,000. So parents need to say this is not safe. But there was a study that showed that that is actually impacting, that stress is impacting this cellular process. So with damage, you see evidence of oxidative stress, you see mitochondria become dysfunctional, you see changes on the tags on DNA, you see actual DNA damage. And the toxic exposome, some of these exposures all have these cellular effects. And that's important to realize that it's not just, we're not just talking about how this might not make someone feel good. It's actually shortening their telomeres or invoking DNA damage. And what happens when cells are damaged in this way is that they are arrested in their cell cycle and they enter an early aging. So cells that are arrested in this way, that go through early aging, start having a remodeling of their genetic material. And that remodeling leads to the formation of these phenotypes called the senescence-associated secretory phenotypes. And what these remodeled cells are, so this is not normal aging. Normal aging, your cell will stop dividing and become metabolically quiescent or silent. Cells that have been aged through damage, prematurely aged through damage, enter this senescence-associated secretory phenotype, and that cell essentially becomes a pro-inflammatory factory, mediator factory. It pumps out all of the cytokines that drive systemic inflammation in our bodies. And why this is important is that we are finding these SASP cells in all of these diseases that we treat. So in atherosclerosis, in severe COVID, in cancer, in osteoporosis, diabetes, liver fibrosis. So that the aging process for people who've been exposed to toxic exposomes will invariably lead to inflammation. So for what we look at in our book is that how is the damage of colonialism that has created these architectures in society around our bodies that predispose us to such, to inflammatory disease, how are those same architectures impacting the earth? And what we see is that just as with our bodies, the damage that has been done to the earth's bodily systems, whether those are rivers or forests or the relationship of indigenous people to those systems, that damage is having the same impact on the Earth's body. There's a brilliant poem. We start the penultimate chapter of the book by Alison Hedges-Koch. She's a professor of narrative medicine, Indigenous poet, called Pando, Pando. And I just really urge you all, if you do one thing, is just to read that poem. But Pando is this amazing organism that looks like many, many organisms, but is one, it's the largest organism on planet Earth, is this grove of aspen trees. And in her poem, she looks at this, she puts together this Bolivian massacre that happened with this, she juxtaposes these two with this organism. And what deep medicine that Raj Patel and I outline in the book, understanding, is that we cannot be healthy unless all of these systems are healthy, that our body is the earth body, that no community can be safe or healthy or well until we all are well. And that really flips the logic of colonial capitalist medicine, how we've been atomized from each other and from the earth, on its head, and starts postulating that we need to advance new understandings of health that become truly holistic. So that when you see that, someone who's living in East Oakland, exposed to the ABNI foundry, their neighborhoods are, impacted by police militarized presence, they cannot actually be healthy by just making better lifestyle choices. No matter how well they eat, that toxic exposome is going to impact the body. So if we as healthcare workers want to make a dent in the rising rates of diabetes, in the rising rates of Alzheimer's disease that we're seeing in places affected by chronic air pollution, that we actually have to get in and retool those structures. So we have to understand that health is not something that actually can be expressed simply through individuals or measuring individuals. We have to understand that health is actually an emergent phenomenon of systems interacting well with other systems. We have to restore critical relationships for health to each other. So the things that have been divided and damaged and conquered through colonialism need to be restored and repaired for health to happen. We have to understand how histories and lines of power impact health. So now there's these buzzwords in academic medicine and even at UCSF about structural determinants of health. But we never really understand how those structures got to be there, or how those structures recreate themselves, or how the lack of articulating how to dismantle those structures becomes a way of reifying the structures and implying their inevitability. And so that political literacy, the literacy around history and lines of power, understanding how they are drawing the impacts on the individual and the social body is really critical. And part of that requires dismantling systems of hierarchy in medicine. So whether it's the doctor-nurse dynamic, or even more so the doctor-patient dynamic, where physicians assume that they are the experts in either communities or individuals. Most doctors will interrupt a patient within 11 seconds of sitting down with them. So that inability to listen and to be humble is a characteristic of colonial medicine. And so if we want to advance if we want to have different outcomes, we need to be practicing a different medicine. And that requires admitting in other systems of knowing, expanding, not throwing out science, not throwing out the good things that come with Western medicine, but really expanding who is peer and peer review, and admitting and weaving and embracing in different forms of knowing to create a much more sophisticated understanding of what health is or what health agendas are. This is coming up right now at UCSF as we're starting to see the problem of doctors assuming that they're anti-racist experts. If we are part of a system of oppression, it becomes very hard to actually be involved in dismantling that system of oppression once we're invested in our position. And so how to really use our positions in academics, if we're here in the ivory towers, to recognize that that we are a huge part of the problem. The care revolution for medicine that we really start to articulate in the book in more detail is abolishing those corporate structures, especially in healthcare. Create worker-owned structures. End capitalism, and starting in healthcare is a great way to do that. If capitalism requires these systems of domination and desperation to function, if we can work collectively to end it and create other models, economic models that center care, we will have different outcomes. So starting in healthcare, especially with COVID, there was a brilliant article today about in the Atlantic on why so many healthcare workers are leaving. If our healthcare response for COVID was run by our nurses, our patients, and our frontline health workers who were most at risk, we would have seen a vastly different COVID response, but it wasn't. It was run by people who are interested in corporate structure, and it was run by people who were looking at keeping the profits coming in. So healthcare systems made record profits, healthcare workers died and now are suffering from PTSD. me. I've been exposed several times at work because policies are not being put in place by people who actually are most at risk. So what we highlight in the book is partnerships of developing other economic models that are regenerative and centered care, and then repairing harms towards people most impacted through colonialism, through things like land back, reparation, and abolishing, toxic structures that are part of a toxic exposome. The work I'm doing with our Ramatusha Ohlone community here in the Bay Area, I'm doing through an organization I started this year with a bunch of other women of color called the Deep Medicine Circle. Our work is to heal the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, story, learning, unlearning, and restoration. And this here is a 38-acre farm in Ramatusha Ohlone territory that we are working to move back into a Ramatusha Ohlone land trust. This was a ceremony we did with Elder Greg Castro, who's a dear friend and someone who's been very active in movements here. This is his homeland, and this is us putting a oak tree, an acorn tree, California native food, back in the land. It was a beautiful experience. There are only several hundred words of Ramatusha Ohlone that are being spoken, but the elder Cata Gomez, that was the first thing she said. She's like, we need to get the families here and we need to start learning the language and writing new songs. The work we're doing there is called Farming is Medicine. We're looking at the food system today and how, it creates so much unhealthiness through, starting with genocide, stealing land, really having fossil fuel based inputs, poisoning the water, poisoning the soil, impacting the food nutrient density, impacting how farmers are treated, farm workers are treated, with just, some benefit to like one or two or three entities, but a lot of illness. So what we've done is flip that on its head. We're starting with land rematriation, which really is centering the work of Indigenous women in reclaiming land and food systems. And we are reframing farmers as ecological stewards and health workers, so that we understand that our health starts in our relationship with the soil and relationship with each other. We uplift Indigenous sovereignty. We're developing farming systems with traditional ecological knowledge and agroecology together. Our work is increasing the soil biodiversity of the places we work, which then increases the water retention, which is great in drought-prone area right now. That more biodiverse soil sinks more CO2. We have less pollution. We have increased nutrient density in the food. I learned that strawberries aren't all strawberries, that, the strawberry you eat that's grown through conventional ag does not have the same anti-inflammatory properties as a wild or organic strawberry. And that is critical because strawberry is one of the first medicines here in Turtle Island, and it's a anti-inflammatory medicine. We have climate adapted seeds in all the food we're growing, which is, we call it more organic, but plus. So all the food we're giving to people impacted through the manufactured crisis of hunger in San Francisco from this, through our partnerships with the American Indian Cultural District and Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. And then we get health. We get, health of the land, health of the people, health of the farmers, health of the people who eat. So that is the work we are doing. I'm going to leave you with this quote from the book. The modern individual has been made through centuries of disconnection from the world around us, from others, and even from our own bodies. While wellness trends can help us to reconnect on some level, they incorrectly focus on the power of the individual to improve their own health, whilst ignoring, or worse, diffusing another power, our ability to collectively dismantle hierarchies that cause these disconnections and consequently a large share of the illnesses we face. So that is all I can do in half an hour. And I look forward to a discussion.
That is echoed a million times, or at least 144 times with our participants. Rupa, I just tweeted that if you ran the clinic, I would go back to clinical medicine.
Aw. Well,
So,
we're building a clinic, so you might
oh,
be
well,
called
we might
upon.
need to talk. We might need to talk. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm going to, yeah, we have lots of great questions coming. I'm going to share this question first from, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, from Nuzat Jamal. And he says, I'm saying he, and I apologize, they say, I absolutely love this talk. I learned a lot about the alignment between molecular inflammation and systemic violence. Dr. Marya articulates these complex issues so well. And here's your question. I wonder what she thinks on how we can engage indigenous youth as the leaders of tomorrow to address intergenerational trauma and leverage the knowledge from their elders, especially if they're urban youth and less connected to their communities of origin. Thank you, Nuzat.
That's a great question. So the work that I've been doing over the last 5 years in Standing Rock, I was called out there to the protest camp by California Native people because it was becoming increasingly violent, the state response. And when I was out there, the grandmothers asked me to help them form a clinic to decolonize medicine. And that quickly became a clinic and a farm. And that's being led by these amazing Lakota Dakota women. There's like 9 women on the board. It's all these women. And they range in age. And I'm actually flying out there tomorrow or day after tomorrow to engage in a several day meeting with the community and with their medicine people around the scope of the work. And I don't think they would, I can't speak for them, but I know that youth is a huge part of this and empowering youth to step into their voices, into their roles as leaders of tomorrow. And that this intergenerational trauma and violence is already impacting their health, as we know with ACEs and a lot of the lateral trauma that's happened. The story that never left Standing Rock every time I was out there during the protest camp was the 17-year-old that killed himself. The suicide of young people there is rampant. So should they be shouldering the work of healing from the intergenerational trauma? I don't know. That's for every community to decide. But what I've seen is that there's a lot of energy now in supporting them coming into their voices and coming into their ceremonies, and a lot of stewardship happening of the young people, and this just fierce pride that that is wonderful to witness, of young Indigenous people realizing how badass their histories are, how Indigenous people on the planet today who are living culturally intact don't suffer from these diseases. There's like no cancer, there's no diabetes. Yanomami territory, those people are seriously healthy. There's no age-associated hypertension. I thought everyone had that. Age-associated hypertension in industrialized societies where we send our kids to school starts right at the age you send your kids to school, and it just keeps going up like that. And in those cultures, it just doesn't even exist. So there's a lot of now biopiracy happening. Researchers from Stanford are trying to steal the poop of Indigenous people in the Amazon to grow out their microbiome on a petri dish and sell it to a pill so we can all rewild our gut. And that just is a part of the same colonial capitalist mentality. It's like you can't actually extract something that is a living portrait of a healthy relationship. That gut microbiota of the Yanomami that leaves them with so little, it protects them against inflammatory disease, is a relationship of themselves to the entire ecosystem around them. It cannot just be, popped as a pill. And so how do we help expose that thinking and stop it, especially in academia? So we stop ripping off people who actually carry the wisdom that can keep us healthy. And that is, part of the work that we were doing in the book is just sharing all the amazing Indigenous thinkers that are out there that are influencing the youth of tomorrow, because they are doing phenomenal work.
Yeah, it's definitely a characteristic of our Western medical system to look for these shortcuts instead of the work to dedicate ourselves to each other and to human connection and to the land, and letting providers do that as well. So really incredible. Darlene, I'm so happy you're here. And I want, first of all, apologize to Nujat Jamal, who identifies as she, her, and I apologize for that. Thank you very much for your message. Darlene, I would love it if you could unmute. And since you are doing some of this work that's helping to show the direct effect of marginalization on people's health, regardless of their behavior, I think of you as one of the key scientists in that work. So I'm really happy you're here and welcome your question.
I can unmute, and I'm in a coffee shop, so I'm going to whisper, but I have a big, loud voice typically. Rupa, I'm on academic sabbatical, so I'm so excited to hear your talk. I know 30 minutes is so challenging, but it's so inspiring. And I have a question that might capture some of the questions that folks are answering in the chat as well. And it picks up on what you said in your talk, which is about we don't know what we don't know. And that's a royal we, right? So I engaged in my academic career, inspired by my own experiences, designed my experiments coming from STEM background. I knew nothing about colonization, and my family has been directly impacted. And I know medical schools now are doing, we're in a Bay Area bubble. So we locally are doing a lot to address structural questions, but a lot of the questions that I have for myself and from students that come through are really about where we see ourselves in these broader structures, right? We're a part of these institutions. We don't want to perpetuate what these institutions have done. So there's that tension between, well, I'm in it. Do I work to deconstruct it? Do I leverage all of the privileges that come with being a part of these systems that we're a part of? But that's a tension that that's expressed by so many of our students. I teach a graduate course called Biological Embedding of Social Factors, where we talk about a lot of what you talk about. And there are still physicians coming through who've never been exposed to socialized medicine ever. And we're in 2020, the last time I taught my graduate course was 2020. So how is that possible? And it's,
yeah, and even
let me mute because I'm going to mute and listen.
No, I hear you, and thanks for these thoughts. Like so are we willing to commit class suicide if it means that everyone can be healthy? Are we willing to burn down a structure, an institution, if it means that all of us can be free? These are the questions, right? And so can we tweak, can we add a training to try to increase the literacy without abandoning the liberal structures that will keep the power structure completely intact? And we're seeing this happen right now at UCSF with our Black medical students. We're like, hell no, this is crazy. They're first year medical students. They see the offerings of discussion of the structural determinants of health, and it's a liberal framework, which means that it is not interested in changing the dynamics of power. It's interested in describing the violences. So it becomes like almost a sick gaze at how violent it is without any prescription on how it should be transformed and changed. So that's the problem of these discussions in current education and in all throughout society, is that there's an understanding of it, a description, a language, like here we are, but there's no understanding of the political determinants of these structural determinants. There's no understanding of what are the architectures of power that we can actually move so that those things kind of crumble and then we can build something different. Or let's start building something different and make it better than that, because it'll serve more people or more different kinds of people. And so I have very little patience with the liberal, the moderate, incremental approach to these things, because I see people dying in the hospital. If I didn't see people dying in the hospital and have that like bird's eye, I call it the bleeding edge, once you see that and you're paying attention to, oh, why are all these people coming in from Bayview Hunters Point with emphysema who've never smoked a day in their lives? Could it be related to the radioactive waste that, UC Berkeley and UCSF were complicit in, greenlighting the development of Bayview Hunters Point just recently? So this isn't like ancient history. This is happening today, every day. And that is what we need to understand, is that colonization, settler colonialism, is a structure that gets recreated every day through our decisions, for our willingness to look away, for our inability to challenge and question the foundation of it. So that and that's playing out in medicine, and that's why I can't handle these DEI experts who are not coming from impacted communities, who are not there to teach. Like the only people who should be teaching those things are people from those communities, and they should be paid really well to be teaching us. That's not, we don't admit the experts into the academy. We don't qualify them as academic. And so that's part of the problem, is that the knowledge is right there. We just don't want to hear it because it's not being filtered for our delicate ears. It will require putting things to the flame. And good thing is the flames are here, right? So this is an important time to go, how do we want to do this? And so I very much embrace the outrage of our medical students. I also know it's not their job to fix it, because they're coming here for education. They're not coming here to, fix the 200-year, 300-year legacy of medical racism. But the sensitivity of every coming in, every entering class is greater and greater, which is fabulous, because that's the fact that we've grown callous to it shows how much we have tacitly accepted it in a violent system. And so that's how I see it.
They're also paying a lot of money, I would add, buying a small house or buying a big house in some markets in the United States, and they shouldn't be paying to do the work. Thank you so much for highlighting their struggle, Rupa. So many amazing questions here. I'm wondering, one just simple question that I think is just so important for those of us in primary care and making Indigenous healing, Indigenous plants and Indigenous treatments more visible. Just what your thoughts are on the legalization of sacred plant medicines, or on ways of making them more visible, I would add.
I don't really have a problem with plants. I would love to make it illegal to have people be homeless, to have real estate be speculative so that there's empty houses and people on the streets. I would like to see it be illegal for the mayor of San Francisco to leave 8,000 people on the streets during a pandemic with wildfires and AQIs of 400. That should be illegal. That's a crime against humanity. A plant, I don't think it should be illegal. I'm happy to live in Oakland where there's less illegal plants. But this whole concept of border creating about what's allowed and what's not allowed,
right.
That's a part of the colonial mentality. I'm very honored to be working with Sage LaPena, who's a Namta Pamwintu California plant medicine person in the deep medicine circle. So she is our traditional ecological knowledge director. And she and I are working together on imagining a clinic to decolonize medicine together on the San Francisco Peninsula. That would be, a free clinic on how we can blend these practices of plant medicines with traditional, Western medicine to develop something that works for the farm worker community that's been, just really impacted by COVID, or the different California Native communities that don't have access to other versions of health systems. So I love plants. I've married a farmer. That's how much I love plants.
I know there are a number of medical students on this call, some that I know and some who are identifying themselves here in the Q&A. And one of them is Marisol Hernandez, who's asking, as a current medical student, do you have any guidance on how to be critical of the current unjust system in place as we navigate our educational curriculum?
Oh, Marisol, this is the heaviest question I have, because I've had medical students ask me if they should continue because it's so hard for them.
Right.
And I know that they are the kind of people we need to help, corrode the system from the inside. But I would never ask them to submit themselves, because that's a warrior's path. It's not for everybody. Some people really want to be a doctor to heal, and it's not in itself a healing path, but there are many healers in medicine, like Coco here, right? And so once you're in it, you can do many different kinds of things. So like working with Sage LaPena is probably the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life. Going out to Standing Rock on Thursday to meet with all the different medicine people and listen to what is their vision for a clinic to decolonize medicine. Most exciting work in my life. Would I have gone if I wasn't an MD? I don't know if they would have wanted me there. So this is the service I'm doing with the path that I have walked. I would advise to engage a practice of protection, what it is that feeds you and reminds you of your brilliance, your beauty, your strength, your power in your ancestries and your culture, and be awake to what you're seeing. And when things feel too toxic, get a bunch of med students and shout about it. Find some faculty who will support you and make some noise, because your voices are critical. We've been shouting for years. They atomize everybody. They're like, oh, it's just you who have the problem. But no, there's so many people who do. So, it depends on where your spirit is. If you're feeling like you've got some warrior in you, go for it, do it. But don't do it unprotected. For me, that protection was music. So I played music throughout my career in medicine, and I play it like with a vengeance, and I love it. And now it's also farming and connecting with the earth and talking, with all the entities around me through that work to help get that protection and support. So I hope that helps. It's not an easy question.
I'm going to ask one last question since we're at Berkeley, thinking about the role of scholarship and academics. So this is from Caradwin Spiller, and she asks, thank you so much for this talk full of such wonderful information. As a medical sociology PhD student, I can only hope that my research on maternal health care, obstetric violence, and obstetric racism can help to echo these ideas in my field. I hope to intentionally craft a career that contributes to this important work you discussed. So my question is, do you see social science or social scientists as having a role in helping with this deep shifting of medicine and health culture? And what does that look like to you? Also, what are the best ways to stay in touch with your ongoing and future work? I would say buy the book and read it. So maybe focus on the first.
Yeah, so like I said, the book that I wrote with Raj happened because Raj and I are friends. And so over 10 years of our friendship, sitting together at dinners and being like, okay, what's going on with this? And me saying, look at what I'm seeing in the hospital, him saying, look at what I'm seeing in peasant movements, us saying, hey, what's going on with this? So that cross-pollination, making friends with social scientists is such a good idea. So make friends with some people in medicine, hang out, have dinner, and cross-pollinate, make friends. I know it sounds really cheesy and Sesame Streety, but I truly believe in the radical power of a dinner party, and to be in spaces where you're sharing ideas very openly. And social scientists have a critical role to play in this. I was just in Tennessee giving a talk at the Austin Peay University. It's a state university where they read my book and they were like, let's form a certificate on health and social justice for health students and sociology students and nursing students. So it was a cross-disciplinary certificate. And when I went out there to give a talk to inaugurate their program, the congressmen there were trying to stop my talk, which made me laugh because it means I distracted them from gerrymandering for probably a few days. But I ended up giving the talk, And it really struck me how powerful it is to have these cross-disciplinary, when lawyers, we have this amazing lawyer in the deep medicine circle, the Armenian lawyer Hasmik Agamian, who does work in land rematriation and labor law in worker-owned cooperatives and nonprofit structure. And so how you get people of different, don't hang out with people who do the same thing you do. I guess that's the thing. Like I love doctors, but really my best friends have been, radical organizers, filmmakers, musicians, and just different kinds of people who are pushing the edge of this thing. So stay open, make lots of friends.
I can't imagine a better way to end this talk. Stay open, make lots of friends, and read Inflamed. Rupa, thank you so much. Really deep thanks. And thanks to all of you who attended today, this special event. And thank you so much to the Berkeley Center for Social Medicine, for the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, and to the School of Public Health, and all the folks in all those places who made this possible and made it so easy for Rupa and myself to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you.